Hey, I'm Kevin Aschenbach. We're out here at Piru Motocross Park for the 2012 CRF250R Intro. For 2012, we've made quite a bit of changes. We've made some changes to the chassis as well as the motor. Starting off on the chassis, we've got a new linkage. It's going to let the bike ride a little bit lower in the stroke in the rear. A little bit more active suspension movement, lets the bike kind of follow the braking bumps and acceleration bumps into and out of corners. Suspension settings the same. They've kind of been tuned to the new linkage, kind of balance the bike. Bike stays flatter. Just, you know, overall more confident, more stable, more predictable. Adding on to the predictability, kind of like we did with the CRF450, it's got new axle collars in the front wheel. It's a little bit more clamping force, just tightens up the front end. Bike tracks better, doesn't climb out of ruts, just more predictable going down rough, high-speed straights and stuff like that. For the motor, it's got a 46mm throttle body, new air boot to match the throttle body, the throttle body to the air box, and then also a new cylinder head that's purpose-built for the 46mm throttle body. And kind of the goal there was to pick up a little bit of bottom and mid-range torque and power, and also picked up a little response. And in picking up that, we were able to carry that through and also pick up just a tiny bit on top. So, you know, overall it's made it a potent motor for 2012, and I think you guys will be happy with it.
Hey, Brendan Lutz with Transworld Motocross. We're out here at Piru Motocross Track testing out the new 2012 Honda CRF250. New for 2012 on this bike is a new cylinder head and throttle body. Honda's goal with that was to give the bike a bit more low end and mid, but keep the really good over rev that it had last year. Out on the track, the motor does have a much better hit down low. It leads into a good mid-range, and just like last year's bike, it pulls really well up top. This track had some really fast straightaways going up the hills. There was the first straightaway in particular, leading into the back. I could just leave it pinned and the bike just continued to pull in any gear that I had it in. And even if in some of the instances, in like the whoops for example here, if I went into them at too low of a gear, the really good over rev just continued to produce power until I could actually shift up into the next gear. So overall, I was pleased with the bike. Good low end hit, good mid-range, and the changes that Honda made definitely did make a difference to the bike. Granted, they're not drastic changes and not a drastic difference from last year's bike, but it is a difference, and I did notice a change. One of my little complaints about the motor though is that when it's hot, it's really hard to start. You have to make sure that it's at very, very top dead center and give it a really clean kick through and no gas at all in order to get it to fire when it's hot. And I think in the heat of the moment in a race, it might be a little difficult to get it going, but I think once you get the starting technique down and know that it needs to be at top dead center, it'll start a lot easier for you. If you guys saw our CRF450R intro video and initial impression, you would know that that bike got quite a few changes to the forks, linkage, and shock. Well, the CRF250R actually got a lot of those same changes. Out on the track, the suspension just feels much more balanced than last year's bike. It doesn't want to dive into corners and doesn't have that stink bug feel like it kind of did last year. With these changes that they've done, it's made the bike much more confidence inspiring, and this track today wasn't very rough, but I was able to dive into ruts and corner the bike much better than last year's machine. It just inspired a lot more confidence for me coming into corners over rough braking bumps, and there were even some square edge potholes that developed, and I wasn't really swapping or anything out there. So from this initial impression on a track that isn't super rough, I'm pretty pleased with the way that the suspension and the overall handling of this bike. I've always liked the CRF250 for its lightweight feel. It really translates well to jumping and cornering and all of that, but with these suspension changes, it's actually a better bike than last year's, and overall it's just a much more balanced ride with the forks and the shock working much better together. For years, Honda had these really skinny pegs that would just collect mud when you go into corners, and they'd kind of get jammed up sometimes. These new bigger, wider pegs, they don't catch as much mud, and it's also a bigger platform for when you're landing off a big jump or just having you have a hard hit on the track like a big G out or even the whoops out here today. So it gives it a much more planted feel and more connected feel to the bike. I've always really liked the brakes on Hondas, and this CRF250R, the brakes work really, really well. The front brake in particular is very strong, but it's also gives a lot of good feedback to the rider and isn't too touchy. So when I was entering corners, I could grab as much front brake as I wanted to without having to worry about the front end tucking or knifing, just because the front brake was so progressive and gave such good feedback to the handlebars. So there you guys have it, the new 2012 Honda CRF250R. This is our initial impression, but check out the next issue of Transworld Motocross for a more in-depth test.
Atomic Beats.